Darkness stretches across the land like a living, breathing entity, swallowing everything in its vast embrace. The wind moves through the valleys and cliffs with a low, mournful whisper, carrying the scent of damp earth and the distant smoke of unseen fires. Somewhere, far off in the shadowed distance, the call of a lone predator echoes through the night, sharp and haunting, sending a shiver through the tall grasses. The stars overhead blink silently, indifferent witnesses to the endless rhythm of life and death that has unfolded over millennia. In this remote and untamed world, humanity exists on the fragile edge of survival, aware of both its insignificance and its unspoken potential. It is a time before cities, before laws, before written words, an age where stories are etched not into stone tablets or scrolls, but into the flickering light of fire and the echo of voice. Among these early humans, one figure moves with purpose through the wilderness, a shaman, a seeker of truths that lie hidden beyond the veil of ordinary perception. Cloaked in furs and adorned with tokens carved from bone and stone, the shaman steps carefully over roots and rocks, every motion deliberate, as though the forest itself might observe and judge each step. In this world, a misstep is not merely inconvenient, it is potentially fatal. Yet, the shaman is guided by more than instinct. A sense, ancient and ineffable, pulses through their body, a connection to something larger than themselves, something unseen yet intensely real. This connection is a thread that binds them to the cycles of life, to the spirits that linger where others fear to tread, and to the dead whose presence still hums faintly in the corners of perception. The fire, small and flickering, is already waiting when the shaman arrives at a clearing. It is a fragile thing, a coil of orange and gold that dances atop dry twigs and hardened earth, but it carries within it the weight of meaning that goes far beyond warmth or light. Fire is life, fire is danger, fire is transformation. It is a tool, a guardian, and a bridge. The shaman kneels before it, the shadows of their face thrown into strange and trembling patterns, and begins the silent communion that will mark the start of the night's journey. In these moments, the forest seems to lean closer, listening. Branches shiver not from wind alone but from anticipation, and the faint rustle of unseen animals punctuates the silence with subtle percussion. Here, at the edge of ordinary perception, the ordinary and the extraordinary begin to merge. As the shaman stares into the flames, the mind begins to quiet. Thoughts, mundane and distracting, fall away like dead leaves. Breath slows, in rhythm with the crackle of the fire. Time itself feels elastic, stretching and bending as if the night has no beginning and no end. In this liminal state, the shaman senses the presence of something not seen but deeply felt. The dead, those who have walked these lands before, hover at the edges of awareness. There is no fear, only recognition, a knowing that life and death are not opposites but intertwined strands of the same fragile web. The flames reflect in eyes that have long since closed, and in that reflection, the shaman glimpses the eternal dance of existence itself. The wind carries stories too, if one knows how to listen. It whispers of hunts long past, of fires that once burned to honor the fallen, of cries that have faded into silence but remain imprinted on the earth. The shaman listens, not with ears alone, but with the whole body, with a sensitivity honed through years of initiation and practice. Every crackle, every sigh of the forest, every flicker of light across stone and bark becomes a message, a sign, a fragment of knowledge waiting to be pieced together. In this way, the shaman is both observer and participant, grounded in the tangible world yet intimately linked to the unseen. Night deepens, and the temperature falls sharply, but the shaman is unaware. Focused inward, the practitioner's mind drifts across landscapes both real and imagined, moving through memories, dreams, and visions that are indistinguishable from one another. Shadows on the trees twist and writhe as if animated by spirits themselves. Occasionally, a distant howl or the flapping of wings reminds the shaman of the corporeal dangers that still exist, tethering the mystical to the mortal. Yet even these reminders feel part of a larger pattern, a symphony of existence that can be felt but not fully understood. Here, in the heart of this untamed world, the shaman begins to prepare for what lies ahead. Rituals do not require words, they are a language older than speech, spoken through gestures, attention, and intention. Small offerings are placed by the fire, stones, feathers, bones, each one chosen with care, each one carrying a meaning as vital as any spoken prayer. The air grows thick with anticipation. Every crackle of the fire, every gust of wind, every shifting shadow feels charged with possibility. The shaman's gaze, fixed upon the flames, begins to see shapes and movements that exist only in the intersection of perception and imagination, glimpses of a world where the dead may yet reveal their secrets. As the first section of this journey concludes, the viewer is left suspended between the tangible and the mystical. The forest is alive, the fire burns steadily, and the shaman waits, a solitary figure poised at the threshold of knowledge that is as terrifying as it is wondrous. The night stretches endlessly, but within it, the seeds of discovery, revelation, and transformation have already begun to take root. It is here, in the stillness of the clearing, in the glow of the fire, that the story of the shaman who saw fire in the eyes of the dead begins, inviting us to follow into a world where mystery and meaning entwine in every flicker of light, every whispered breath, and every shadow that passes unseen. Deep within the shadows of time, humanity began to mark its existence upon the world, leaving traces not in grand monuments or inscribed tablets, but in subtle, deliberate impressions upon stone and clay. Faces, animals, and abstract symbols were etched, painted, and carved with a reverence that suggested more than mere decoration. These early works were not created for fleeting beauty, they were messages, prayers, and stories, attempts to capture a reality that extended beyond the physical senses. In the dim recesses of caves, illuminated only by flickering torchlight or the occasional glint of sunlight seeping through cracks, humans recorded moments of triumph and fear, survival and mortality. Each stroke of pigment, each careful chisel mark, was a testament to the human desire to understand the world, to connect with forces greater than themselves, and to speak across the boundary between life and death. Cave walls, rough and uneven, became sacred canvases. The animals depicted were more than prey or predators, they were companions, spirits, and symbols of unseen power. A bison frozen mid-stride, its muscles taut, might represent the abundance of the hunt or the dangerous beauty of nature itself. A handprint, pressed into ochre with deliberate pressure, declares presence. I was here. I mattered. I witnessed. In these markings, we see the emergence of consciousness reaching outward, striving to make sense of the chaos and mystery surrounding early humans. The act of creation itself was a ritual, a bridge between the material world and the intangible currents of thought, emotion, and spirituality. Burial practices, too, reveal a growing awareness of death as both ending and beginning. Bodies were carefully positioned, often accompanied by tools, ornaments, or the remnants of food. Some were placed in fetal positions, as though returning to the womb, a gesture that suggests both respect and hope for continuity. Others were adorned with shells, pigments, and beads, transforming the body into a living relic, a vessel of memory and identity. These rituals hint at a profound understanding that life does not simply cease with the final breath, but continues in ways unseen, in the stories told, in the hands that remember, in the fire that still burns in the heart of the living. Archaeology provides glimpses of these practices, but interpretation requires imagination as well as evidence, a willingness to step into a mind shaped by an entirely different reality. The shaman, already present in this emerging world, plays a pivotal role in translating the unknown. Through dance, song, and ritualized gestures, the shaman becomes a conduit for ancestral wisdom, a living link between the material and spiritual realms. Painted figures on cave walls may represent not merely the creatures themselves but the shaman's vision of their essence. Marks in stone and ochre might be reminders of victories, warnings, or invitations to commune with the forces that shape human existence. The shaman reads these signs with an intimacy born of experience and sensitivity, understanding that the painted bison, the carved face, the scattered shells, all carry significance beyond their immediate form. There is a profound emotional resonance in these early expressions. Modern observers often marvel at their technical skill, yet the deeper wonder lies in the mindset that produced them, a mindset capable of awe, reflection, and a profound sense of connection to a vast, often indifferent universe. Each line, curve, and pigment choice embodies a philosophical inquiry, a meditation on life, death, and the unseen energies that flow through all things. These creations speak to a curiosity that is as much internal as external, an effort to map the cosmos not only in observable patterns but in the hidden terrains of spirit and consciousness. Movement within these sacred spaces also mattered. Caves were not passive galleries but environments deliberately chosen to enhance the sensory experience. Flickering torchlight made images come alive, shadows stretching and dancing across textured walls. Sound carried differently within stone chambers, amplifying chants, drumming, or whispers. The interaction between body, environment, and artwork created a full sensory ritual, one that enveloped participants and demanded attention, reverence, and awareness. In this way, early humans were not merely observing, they were participating, inhabiting a liminal space where art, ritual, and consciousness intertwined. Consider the handprints scattered across a cave wall. To modern eyes, they may seem like simple marks, but in context, they carry layered meaning. They declare identity and presence, yet they also invoke connection, to the ancestors, to the tribe, to the unseen forces surrounding life and death. Each print is a dialogue, a reach across generations, a gesture of belonging and acknowledgement. In many ways, these marks function as the first written language, not in words but in intention, a code that only those attuned to the spiritual currents of the time could fully interpret. The combination of art and ritual also served a practical purpose. By enacting hunts or spiritual ceremonies on cave walls, early humans could mentally rehearse events, strategies, and communal behavior. This blending of symbolic and literal understanding strengthened social bonds, created shared narratives, and reinforced cultural memory. Yet there is always an ineffable aspect, the sense that something is being communicated that transcends explanation, that the walls themselves hold secrets, glimpses of truths that remain just beyond the reach of ordinary perception. By studying these artifacts, we are invited into a world both familiar and alien. We see ourselves in their curiosity, their attempts to grasp what cannot be seen. But we are also reminded of how different human consciousness once was, how intimately linked life and death, survival and ritual, observation and imagination could be. Each mark is a meditation, each image a question: who are we, why are we here, and what lies beyond the fragile veil of mortality? The shaman's perspective brings clarity to this inquiry, showing that these early humans were not merely creating, they were seeking, probing the depths of existence, and finding ways to navigate a universe that demanded both courage and humility. Through these walls and relics, the past speaks. It whispers of lives lived with awareness, fear, and reverence. It reveals humans who looked beyond the tangible world for meaning, who saw death not as an end but as a threshold, and who used art and ritual to explore the mysteries of consciousness itself. In this way, the caves and carvings become more than historical records, they are mirrors, reflecting the eternal human quest to understand, to connect, and to transcend. As the shaman moves through these spaces, the connection between observer and observed, living and dead, is made tangible, palpable, and profoundly moving. Fire has always been more than a simple tool. In the earliest days of human existence, it was a force that could nurture and destroy, illuminate and terrify, comfort and challenge. Its first sparks, discovered perhaps through lightning striking dry wood or friction between stones, became a revolutionary presence, shaping the very trajectory of survival and culture. Fire provided warmth during frozen nights, protection against predators, and a means to cook food, making nourishment more accessible and bodies stronger. Yet beyond the practical, fire held a symbolic weight that early humans could scarcely articulate but deeply felt, a living, breathing embodiment of the mysterious forces that governed existence. It was elemental, sacred, and alive. The shaman understood fire in ways that surpassed practicality. To ordinary humans, it was a source of light and heat, a tool for hunting and cooking. To the shaman, it was a conduit, a portal through which the unseen could communicate with the seen. The flames danced with intention, casting shadows that seemed to move independently, twisting across cave walls, forest floors, and rocky outcroppings. As the shaman gazed into the fire, the edges of reality blurred, and visions of distant places, past events, and spirits of the departed flickered across the mind's eye. This was no hallucination but a deliberate meditation, a form of perception honed over years of initiation, discipline, and attunement to the rhythms of the natural and spiritual world. Night in prehistoric landscapes carried with it profound vulnerability. The absence of light magnified every threat, predators slinking through shadows, the chill that could seep into bones, the isolation of vast wilderness stretching in all directions. Fire offered a fragile bulwark against these dangers. A small flame could deter wolves, bears, or other predators, but more importantly, it created a psychological boundary, a circle of safety in which humans could gather, converse, and reflect. Within this circle, the shaman held dominion not through physical might but through understanding of nature, of life, of death, and of the threads that connected all living things. Early humans observed fire's behavior with awe and reverence. Sparks would leap unpredictably, consuming dry leaves or branches in sudden bursts of light. Smoke would curl upward, forming shapes that seemed deliberate, almost communicative. The crackle of burning wood was not merely sound, it was a language, a rhythm that could soothe or alert, guide or warn. Shamans interpreted these signals, discerning patterns in the chaos, reading the flickers as messages from forces beyond human comprehension. Fire became both mirror and map, reflecting the world within as much as illuminating the world outside. The act of tending fire was itself a ritual. Selecting kindling, coaxing flames, maintaining balance between fuel and oxygen, these were not mundane chores but deliberate, mindful acts of creation. Each movement carried significance, and mistakes could be fatal. Too little attention, and the fire might die, leaving the group exposed to cold and danger. Too much, and it could rage uncontrollably, consuming not only resources but lives. This careful stewardship mirrored the shaman's role in the broader spiritual ecosystem, mediator, interpreter, guardian. In guiding the fire, the shaman also guided the perception of the community, shaping the narrative of survival and spiritual engagement. Fire also served as a canvas for imagination. In the flickering glow, ordinary objects transformed. Stones became guardians, branches turned into serpents or birds, shadows suggested spirits hovering at the edge of perception. Children and adults alike would watch the interplay of light and darkness, learning to see patterns, shapes, and symbols. In these moments, art and ritual intertwined. Cave walls, tent flaps, and the earth itself became stages for storytelling. Fireside tales of hunts, survival, and encounters with the unknown were enhanced by the primal rhythm of the flames, the hypnotic sway of heat waves, and the eerie silhouettes cast against surrounding trees or walls. The shaman's connection to fire was also profoundly spiritual. Flames were seen as living, intelligent, and responsive. Some sparks were interpreted as omens, the direction of smoke, a message from ancestors. By meditating upon the fire, the shaman could traverse the liminal spaces between life and death, reality and dream, consciousness and spirit. In these moments, the fire became more than matter, it was a portal, a medium through which mysteries of existence could be glimpsed. The shaman's eyes, reflected in the firelight, seemed to burn with knowledge drawn not only from life experience but from communion with forces that elude ordinary perception. This relationship with fire was not without danger. Misjudgment could be catastrophic. A fire could consume a shelter, a forest, or a life. But in the shamanic practice, danger itself was a teacher. Through controlled exposure to risk, the shaman honed intuition, patience, and courage. Fire was a paradox, it could both destroy and illuminate, harm and protect, terrify and inspire. Learning to navigate this paradox was part of the broader human journey, an understanding that life and death, light and darkness, creation and destruction are inseparable. Even the smallest flame carried philosophical resonance. Sitting beside the fire, early humans could contemplate their place in the universe. They were acutely aware of mortality, of the fleeting nature of existence, yet also of the power to shape, influence, and remember. Fire provided a temporary dominion over the wild, a fleeting sense of control over a world that was otherwise vast and indifferent. It also offered continuity, a connection between generations. The fire of a parent, of a teacher, or of a shaman could guide children, communicate tradition, and anchor the tribe in shared experience. In this way, fire becomes a symbol of transformation. Raw materials are altered, wood becomes ash, food becomes sustenance, darkness becomes light. The shaman understood that these transformations mirrored the human condition itself. Life is a constant process of change, of passing through thresholds, of confronting unknowns and emerging with new insight. By mastering fire, the shaman mastered a reflection of life's inherent duality, creation and destruction, protection and peril, the temporal and the eternal. By night's end, when the embers glow softly and shadows grow long, the fire has fulfilled its role. It has nurtured, revealed, and transformed. It has served as medium, teacher, and companion. And for the shaman, it has been a gateway, a lens through which the unseen can be perceived, a tool through which the mysteries of life and death can be glimpsed. The flames flicker, slowly dwindling, but the knowledge, the understanding, the connection forged in that circle of light endures. In fire, humanity found not only survival but revelation, a tangible reflection of its own consciousness and its enduring quest to understand a world far larger and stranger than any one person could know. The human fascination with eyes is ancient, instinctual, and profound. Even in the earliest communities, eyes were more than organs of sight, they were windows, mirrors, and thresholds. They could reveal fear, courage, curiosity, or grief. They could connect one being to another in ways that words could never capture. In the dim glow of firelight, a glance could communicate trust or warning, solidarity or separation. To the shaman, eyes held even deeper significance. They were believed to harbor the essence of a soul, the energy that survives beyond the mortal shell. Gazing into the eyes of another, whether living or dead, was an act that bridged perception and intuition, the known and the unknowable. In ritualistic settings, eyes became symbolic tools. The shaman would study the gaze of tribe members, of hunters returning from the forest, of children playing near the fire. Each glance was observed for subtle clues, tension in the brow, the way the light caught the iris, the fleeting flicker of emotion. These small signs were read as omens, messages, or warnings. Yet, the true depth of perception was reserved for encounters with the dead. Burial practices, preserved in the archaeological record, often placed the deceased in positions that emphasized visibility, faces exposed, eyes closed but aligned with the rising sun or flickering torchlight. The shaman interpreted these arrangements, understanding that eyes, even in death, continued to speak, to witness, and to teach. The cave walls themselves seemed to honor the eyes. Paintings frequently emphasized gaze, direction, and focus. Figures of animals often include pronounced eyes, staring intently forward, as if locked in perpetual awareness. Human figurines, masks, and carvings display eyes that are exaggerated or highlighted, suggesting an understanding that vision, and the perception it implies, was central to existence and survival. Eyes, in this sense, were portals. They connected the observer to the observed, the present to the past, the living to the departed. In meditative focus, the shaman could discern these connections, recognizing patterns that might elude ordinary perception. This understanding of vision was not merely literal. Eyes symbolized insight, awareness, and the ability to perceive truths hidden from ordinary senses. The shaman's practice often relied on subtle cues, a glint in the corner of a fellow tribesperson's eye, a shadow moving unnaturally across the firelight, or the reflective gleam of a skull in a burial chamber. Each observation was a thread, woven into a larger tapestry of understanding. By interpreting these signs, the shaman navigated the complex relationships between life and death, danger and opportunity, the natural and the supernatural. Even in moments of meditation, eyes were central to shamanic focus. The shaman might sit before a flickering flame, tracing the reflection of their own eyes in the dancing light. This exercise, simple yet profound, was believed to deepen perception, aligning the consciousness with forces that are ordinarily imperceptible. Eyes became a mirror for the self, revealing not only physical traits but inner states, fears, desires, and connections to the broader world. The act of observation was reciprocal. As the shaman studied the eyes of the living, so too did the world and the spirits respond, revealing truths and mysteries in subtle, often ephemeral ways. This intricate relationship between eyes and perception extended to death rituals. The dead were often prepared with care, eyes closed or gently covered, yet sometimes deliberately left open for ceremonial purposes. The shaman would interpret these postures as intentional, believing that the gaze of the deceased could be accessed, studied, and even engaged. In this way, the boundary between life and death, presence and absence, was navigable. The eyes became a medium for dialogue, a means through which knowledge, warning, or guidance could pass from the departed to the living. Such practices suggest a sophisticated understanding of human consciousness, of symbolism, and of the continuity of existence beyond the physical body. Emotion and philosophy intertwined in these observations. Fear, curiosity, grief, and wonder were all encoded in the eyes. The shaman's meditation upon these signals was not a mechanical exercise but a deeply empathetic engagement with the human condition. To see the fire reflected in another's eyes was to witness life's vitality. To perceive emptiness or stillness was to confront mortality. And to glimpse what could not be described was to approach the core of human mystery, the realization that existence is both fragile and infinite, fleeting yet eternal. The shaman also recognized that eyes were repositories of memory. In interactions with tribe members, subtle expressions could reveal histories, experiences, and relationships. The eyes held the echoes of fear, triumph, and grief, layering past and present into a single, perceptible moment. In observing these micro-expressions, the shaman could advise, warn, or guide, drawing on accumulated wisdom not merely from personal experience but from the collective memory encoded in the living gaze of the community. In mystical practice, the shaman often sought the fire in the eyes, a phrase that captures both literal and symbolic meaning. It refers to the spark of consciousness, awareness, or spirit that resides within a being, living or departed. In the eyes, the shaman could perceive energy, emotion, and presence. When gazing at the dead, this vision became even more intense. The eyes, though physically lifeless, were thought to retain traces of identity, vitality, and memory. It was through this delicate perception that the shaman bridged worlds, mediating between the temporal and the eternal, the seen and the unseen. Even outside ritual, eyes guided early humans in practical ways. Hunters observed subtle movements in prey, tracking the gleam of reflected light or the flicker of movement in shadow. Mothers watched children's expressions for signs of danger, hunger, or curiosity. Communal bonds were reinforced through visual engagement, a complex system of recognition, empathy, and communication that required keen observation and deep sensitivity. In this sense, eyes were both literal and symbolic lifelines, essential for survival and social cohesion. The philosophical resonance of eyes extends beyond survival. They represent self-awareness, consciousness, and the capacity to connect with others. In early human culture, this understanding was embodied in ritual, art, and observation. Eyes were not simply organs but vessels of meaning, channels through which understanding flowed. The shaman, attuned to these subtleties, became a master navigator of human experience, reading the windows of consciousness as carefully as any map, interpreting signals that others could not perceive, and using this knowledge to maintain harmony between life and the forces that surround it. By contemplating eyes in both the living and the dead, the shaman fostered empathy, insight, and wisdom. The gaze became a language without words, a bridge between worlds, a tool for survival, and a means of spiritual connection. Through this lens, the shaman's practice reveals not only early human ingenuity but also the deep, enduring human desire to see, understand, and connect with that which lies beyond the immediate and the tangible. In the quiet of the night, in the glow of firelight, and in the stillness of burial chambers, the eyes speak, and the shaman listens, guiding the living with knowledge drawn from the silent, unblinking witnesses of the past. Becoming a shaman was never a simple task. It was not a role conferred by birthright alone, nor could it be achieved by mere observation. It demanded endurance, courage, and a willingness to confront both the natural and supernatural worlds in ways that ordinary humans might find terrifying. The path was arduous, requiring a combination of physical trials, mental fortitude, and spiritual attunement. From early childhood, some individuals displayed sensitivity to forces others could not perceive, a reaction to subtle currents in nature, dreams filled with symbolic meaning, or an uncanny awareness of life and death. These individuals were identified by elders, often marked by certain behaviors, gestures, or even visions that suggested a capacity to navigate the unseen. Initiation into shamanism was rarely straightforward. The aspirant would often spend days or even weeks in isolation, deep in forests, caves, or highlands, away from the safety and familiarity of the tribe. During these periods, they confronted hunger, cold, and darkness, learning to attune their senses to the rhythms of the world around them. The silence of the wilderness became a teacher, amplifying the smallest sounds, the snap of a twig, the distant howl of a predator, the rustle of leaves in the wind. Each sound, each subtle movement, carried significance. The shaman in training learned to interpret them not merely as sensory input but as messages from forces beyond ordinary understanding. Dreams played a crucial role in this initiation. In trance states, often induced by rhythmic drumming, chanting, or fasting, the aspirant would traverse liminal spaces between life and death, reality and imagination. These dreams were not random, they were believed to be communications from spirits, ancestors, and unseen beings who tested the resolve, courage, and clarity of the individual. To navigate these experiences successfully required mental discipline, a capacity for reflection, and a willingness to confront fear and uncertainty. Each trial in the dream world mirrored the challenges of the waking world, teaching lessons about mortality, empathy, and the responsibilities inherent in holding the knowledge of the unseen. The shaman's training also included the study of herbs, roots, and natural elements. Some plants held medicinal properties, while others induced visions or altered perception. The shaman learned to distinguish between the mundane and the mystical effects of these substances, using them judiciously in both healing and ritual practices. Mastery of this knowledge required meticulous observation, experimentation, and intuition. Mistakes could be fatal, both for the aspirant and for those who would later seek the shaman's guidance. Yet, in this delicate balance of risk and understanding lay the core of shamanic wisdom, an intimate connection to the living world and the forces that animate it. The relationship with the tribe was also essential. While the shaman often operated on the fringes of ordinary life, they were never isolated from the community entirely. They observed births, deaths, hunts, and daily routines, using these experiences to build a nuanced understanding of human needs, fears, and desires. The shaman acted as mediator, healer, and guide, interpreting omens and guiding decisions with insight drawn from both observation and spiritual communion. In this role, empathy was as important as knowledge. The shaman's ability to perceive emotion, intention, and hidden dynamics allowed them to maintain harmony within the tribe, ensuring survival not only through practical means but through psychological and spiritual guidance. Initiation rituals often involve dramatic tests of courage. Aspirants might be exposed to extreme cold or heat, left alone in darkness for extended periods, or challenged to endure pain without showing fear. Each trial was designed to push the limits of human perception and resilience, stripping away ego and fostering a deep attunement to the natural and spiritual worlds. The shaman in training learned that fear could cloud judgment, that distraction could be fatal, and that clarity of mind was essential for survival and spiritual insight. These experiences cultivated a unique presence, one that balanced humility and authority, vulnerability and strength. Mentorship was central to the journey. Experienced shamans guided the aspirant through the complexities of practice, sharing knowledge that could not be written or codified. Stories, allegories, and practical demonstrations served as teaching tools. The mentor transmitted wisdom through example, emphasizing observation, reflection, and the cultivation of subtle perception. The aspirant gradually learned to navigate the delicate interplay of life, death, and the unseen, gaining the skills necessary to serve as both interpreter and guardian of spiritual knowledge. Over time, the aspirant transformed, shedding ordinary perspectives and adopting a worldview that embraced both the tangible and the mystical. The shaman's transformation was not merely functional but existential. They developed heightened sensitivity to the energies of the world, an awareness that extended beyond ordinary senses. Subtle movements, faint sounds, and minor fluctuations in light and temperature became meaningful signals. This attunement allowed the shaman to perceive dangers, opportunities, and spiritual presences with uncanny accuracy. More than that, it fostered empathy, compassion, and a profound understanding of the interconnectedness of all things. Life, death, the elements, animals, and humans were no longer separate, they existed in a dynamic web, with the shaman as both participant and observer, mediator and interpreter. The emotional and psychological weight of this role cannot be overstated. The shaman bears responsibility for the spiritual and physical well-being of the tribe, often navigating realms that provoke fear, grief, and awe. Encounters with the dead, with spirits, and with forces beyond comprehension are routine, yet each experience demands presence, courage, and clarity. The shaman must maintain balance, protecting the living from harm while honoring the wisdom and presence of those who have passed. This delicate negotiation between worlds is both a gift and a burden, requiring resilience, insight, and a profound commitment to understanding the mysteries of existence. In essence, the journey to becoming a shaman is a passage from ordinary consciousness to a heightened, integrative awareness. It is a path that demands humility, courage, and dedication. The aspirant emerges not merely as a practitioner but as a vessel for understanding, empathy, and connection. They become a living bridge, capable of perceiving forces beyond the ordinary, guiding the living through uncertainty, and honoring the presence of those who have passed. The transformation is gradual yet profound, marked by both trial and revelation, risk and enlightenment. By the time the initiation concludes, the shaman has become attuned to the rhythms of life, death, and the unseen. They understand fire not just as warmth but as a medium, eyes not just as organs but as portals, and the forest not just as a habitat but as a living, communicating entity. Every observation, every ritual, every insight weaves into a comprehensive understanding of the world, a perception that balances practicality, empathy, and spiritual awareness. In this way, the shaman becomes indispensable, a guardian of knowledge and a guide through the complex tapestry of existence, bridging the worlds of the living and the dead with profound sensitivity and skill. The dead were never truly gone in the eyes of the shaman. Even as their bodies lay motionless in the soil, beneath stone, or within the folds of a cave, their presence lingered, subtle but palpable, in the spaces they once occupied. In the flickering firelight, the shaman could feel the faint tremors of life that had passed, a residual energy that hinted at stories, memories, and wisdom carried beyond the physical form. These spirits were not always benign. Some were restless, clinging to unresolved fears or lingering attachments. Others offered guidance, protection, and insight, manifesting in ways that could only be perceived by one trained to sense beyond the ordinary. The shaman's task was to navigate these realms with care, discerning which presences were to be honored, which required guidance, and which demanded caution. Burial practices reflected the intricate relationship between the living and the dead. Some bodies were carefully positioned, wrapped in furs, or adorned with shells and ornaments. Others were placed in hidden chambers, sealed with stone, yet still aligned with celestial events, the rising sun, the full moon, or significant constellations. These arrangements were not arbitrary. They were intentional gestures, designed to respect the dead while acknowledging the continuity of existence. The shaman interpreted these practices as communication, messages encoded in positioning, offerings, and ceremonial artifacts. In this way, the rituals of the dead became a language, one that connected generations and conveyed understanding about life, mortality, and the unseen forces that govern the world. Chants and songs often accompanied these rituals. The human voice, modulated with intention, could pierce the boundaries between life and death. Rhythm and tone carried meaning, guiding spirits, soothing the departed, or invoking presence. The shaman's voice acted as a bridge, translating unseen energies into forms that the living could understand, perceive, and respond to. Even silence was purposeful. A pause could create space for the dead to speak, for memories to surface, and for reflection to take hold. In these moments, the shaman was both mediator and witness, guiding the living while honoring the presence of those who had passed. The shaman's engagement with the dead was deeply emotional. It required empathy, courage, and an understanding that grief, fear, and memory could shape both perception and ritual. Confronting death was never a passive act. It demanded full participation, awareness, and openness. The shaman felt the lingering presence of the deceased not as an abstraction but as a living force, a continuation of existence that required respect and attention. Every gesture, placing a stone, arranging offerings, tracing a pattern in the earth, was informed by this awareness. Rituals became acts of conversation, a way of listening to what could not be spoken and responding with intention, care, and understanding. The emotional weight of these encounters shaped the shaman's role in the community. As guardian of the liminal spaces, the shaman mediated not only between the living and the dead but also between individuals and their own fears, doubts, and grief. They interpreted signs from ancestors to guide decisions, warned of unseen dangers, and offered comfort when mortality became overwhelming. In essence, the shaman acted as a translator of existence itself, transforming the unknowable into insight, anxiety into understanding, and fear into reverence. This delicate balance required a profound understanding of both human psychology and the spiritual landscape, creating a role that was as essential socially as it was mystically. Ritual tools often held layered significance. Bones, stones, feathers, and pigments were not mere objects. They were carriers of meaning, channels for communication, and anchors for attention. Each item, carefully selected and placed, could resonate with the energy of the deceased, the intent of the ritual, and the awareness of those present. The shaman understood the properties of these items, their symbolism, and their power to bridge worlds. Through these objects, rituals gained structure, focus, and resonance, creating an environment where both living and dead could coexist in temporary communion. Caves and other sacred spaces amplified this connection. The architecture of nature itself, the curve of a rock, the echo of a cavern, the interplay of shadow and light, became a medium through which the dead could be honored and perceived. The shaman moved deliberately within these spaces, sensing subtle shifts in temperature, air currents, and sound. Each sensory cue was interpreted, adding depth to the ritual and reinforcing the perception of unseen presences. In this way, environment and intention coalesced, producing experiences that were simultaneously spiritual, emotional, and physical. Interaction with the dead was not limited to structured ceremonies. Even in daily life, the shaman remained aware of lingering presences. Walking through forests, approaching streams, or entering communal spaces, the shaman could feel echoes of the departed in patterns of light, sound, and motion. This constant awareness shaped decisions, behaviors, and guidance offered to the tribe. It fostered a worldview in which life and death were inseparable, dynamic elements of a continuous cycle rather than opposing forces. The shaman's understanding of mortality extended beyond fear or grief. Death was viewed as a transition, a passage into another form of existence that remained connected to the living. This perspective provided comfort, structure, and meaning for communities facing loss. By maintaining rituals, communicating with spirits, and interpreting signs, the shaman preserved continuity, memory, and wisdom. In doing so, they transformed fear into reverence, loss into reflection, and absence into presence. These practices were not static, they evolved alongside the community and environment. Each generation contributed its insights, innovations, and interpretations. The shaman absorbed these contributions, integrating them into a living tradition that honored the dead while serving the needs of the living. This dynamic process created a rich tapestry of spiritual, emotional, and social understanding, one that balanced respect for the past with responsiveness to the present. Ultimately, the shaman's work with the dead was a meditation on existence itself. It reflected the intertwined nature of life and mortality, the visible and invisible, the tangible and transcendent. By engaging with the departed, the shaman illuminated the mysteries of consciousness, memory, and continuity. The rituals, chants, objects, and spaces used in this practice were not mere formalities but expressions of a profound understanding, that life and death are inseparably linked, that memory and presence endure beyond the corporeal, and that humanity's role is to honor, learn from, and coexist with forces that cannot be fully controlled or comprehended. Through these interactions, the shaman maintained the delicate balance between worlds. They ensured that the wisdom of the dead remained accessible, that grief was transformed into understanding, and that the living could navigate their existence with insight and reverence. The dead were never silent, never absent. In the hands of the shaman, their presence became a guide, a teacher, and a mirror, reflecting both the fragility and the resilience of life. By embracing this responsibility, the shaman bridged the gap between mortality and eternity, offering their tribe not only knowledge but a sense of connection to something far larger than themselves. The forest at night holds a language all its own, one that speaks to those attuned enough to hear it. Every rustle of leaves, the soft scuff of paws across the forest floor, the distant cry of an unseen predator, each sound carries meaning. For ordinary humans, these noises might blend into a backdrop of fear or pass unnoticed. For the shaman, however, they are a symphony of messages, warnings, and guidance. The senses are sharpened, tuned to perceive subtle changes in the environment that reveal the movements of animals, the approach of weather, or even the presence of unseen spiritual forces. In this attentiveness, the shaman becomes not merely a part of the forest, but a participant in its intricate, ongoing dialogue. The interplay of darkness and light shapes perception. Moonlight filtering through dense canopies produces shifting patterns, shadows that seem to move independently. Firelight, whether from a small blaze in a clearing or a ceremonial torch, flickers against tree trunks, casting shapes that suggest movement, intention, and presence. These visual cues, coupled with sound, form a rich tapestry of information. The shaman reads these signs with precision, understanding that even the smallest detail, a bent branch, a disturbed leaf, the gleam of an eye in the underbrush, can carry vital significance. In these moments, observation becomes meditation, and meditation becomes survival. Stillness is essential. The shaman often freezes mid-step, heart slowed, breath measured, eyes scanning. Time stretches in these periods of heightened awareness. The forest seems to lean in, amplifying the subtlest signals. Wind shifts direction, carrying scents and sounds from distant sources. The shaman's mind filters the information, discerning patterns amidst the apparent chaos. This discipline of attention, honed through years of initiation and practice, allows the shaman to navigate a world filled with both visible and invisible forces, balancing risk with intuition, danger with understanding. Night hunting and tracking were part of survival but also offered spiritual insight. Animals were never merely resources, they were teachers, messengers, and mirrors. Tracking the silent movements of a deer, observing the sudden flight of birds, or interpreting the lingering signs of a predator's presence provided lessons in patience, strategy, and the flow of life. The shaman interpreted these behaviors, translating them into guidance for the community. Each observation was both practical and symbolic, reflecting not only the rhythms of the natural world but also the spiritual currents that shape existence. Sounds carried further than sight in the nocturnal forest. The snap of a twig or the drip of water could signal approach, danger, or opportunity. By listening with heightened awareness, the shaman could anticipate events before they unfolded. This attunement required a deep trust in perception, the ability to differentiate between what was merely environmental noise and what carried meaning. Mistakes could be fatal, but mastery over this auditory landscape brought both safety and insight. The shaman learned to interpret echoes, pauses, and tonal variations, gaining understanding of the living world and the spirits that moved among it. The forest smell was another critical guide. The earthy aroma of soil, the musk of nocturnal animals, the resin of trees, and the faint smoke of distant fires, all combined to create a complex olfactory map. The shaman could distinguish the scent of a predator from that of a harmless creature, track the passage of humans, and even sense changes in the wind that might bring rain or danger. These smells were not only practical cues but symbolic ones. Certain scents were believed to carry spiritual significance, marking the presence of spirits, foretelling events, or signaling transitions between states of life and death. Observation extended beyond the external world to internal awareness. The shaman monitored bodily responses, heart rate, breath, tension, and subtle shifts in emotion. These signals were as informative as external cues, reflecting intuition, alignment with natural rhythms, and receptivity to unseen forces. This self-awareness was cultivated through meditation, ritual, and practice, allowing the shaman to maintain balance in physically and emotionally demanding circumstances. The inner and outer worlds merged, creating a seamless perceptual continuum in which survival, insight, and spiritual attunement were intertwined. The forest's nocturnal rhythms offered lessons in patience and humility. Success required stillness, attentiveness, and the understanding that not all information is immediate. Predators, prey, and spirits moved on their own timelines, indifferent to human desires. The shaman learned to read subtle patterns, a rustling leaf signaling a predator's approach, a sudden silence indicating the cessation of activity, or a flicker of light suggesting movement beyond ordinary perception. These observations were interpreted not only for survival but for guidance, meditation, and ritual. In this way, the nocturnal forest became a classroom, laboratory, and temple, teaching lessons that were practical, emotional, and spiritual simultaneously. The shaman's connection to the forest extended into symbolic understanding. Each animal, tree, or water source could represent a deeper truth. The sudden appearance of a wolf might signify danger, strength, or a message from the spirit world. The flight of a bird could carry omens, insight, or warnings. Observing these movements was not a superstitious act but a form of communication, grounded in careful attention and spiritual sensitivity. The shaman interpreted these signs with discernment, balancing intuition with empirical observation, pattern recognition with reflective insight. Encounters with spirits were often mediated through the environment. Shadows, mist, or flickers of light could be perceived as manifestations of the unseen. The shaman approached these moments with caution, recognizing that fear could distort perception. Instead, each encounter was met with attentiveness, empathy, and mindfulness. The forest was both alive and sacred, a space where the veil between worlds thinned, allowing glimpses of forces ordinarily imperceptible. The shaman's movements, thoughts, and rituals shaped the interaction, creating conditions in which guidance, understanding, or protection could be received from spirits. Over time, these nocturnal journeys cultivated profound philosophical insight. The shaman observed the interdependence of all living things, the predator and the prey, the wind and the water, the firefly and the darkness. Each entity moved within an intricate web of cause and effect, balance and disruption. Understanding this interconnectedness informed the shaman's guidance, shaping not only survival strategies but also moral and spiritual perspectives. The forest became a living metaphor for existence itself, teaching lessons about impermanence, harmony, and the continuous cycle of life and death. By the end of the night, the shaman returned to the tribe not only with practical knowledge but with insight and awareness that bridged worlds. The observations, meditations, and interactions with both natural and spiritual elements provided guidance for the living, wisdom for decision-making, and continuity with the unseen. The forest had spoken, and the shaman had listened, translating subtle cues into meaning that could inform survival, ritual, and understanding. These nocturnal practices reinforced the shaman's role as guardian, interpreter, and spiritual guide, demonstrating the profound integration of perception, empathy, and knowledge in navigating both the tangible and intangible worlds. The night sky has always held a mysterious power over humanity, but for the shaman, it was a vast canvas of meaning, guidance, and insight. Stars were more than distant lights, they were markers of time, cycles of nature, and symbols of forces that transcended ordinary understanding. Constellations were read as maps, both literal and spiritual, revealing the rhythm of seasons, the migration of animals, and the alignment of natural events critical to survival. Beyond their practical utility, these celestial patterns were imbued with deeper significance, serving as a bridge between the earthly and the cosmic, the living and the departed. The shaman observed the heavens with awe and discipline, interpreting their movements not merely as phenomena but as messages woven into the fabric of existence. Moonlight cast the world in a silver glow, softening contours and transforming the landscape. Shadows stretched and shifted across trees, rocks, and snow, creating illusions and possibilities. The interplay of light and dark reflected the dualities that shaped life, creation and destruction, day and night, presence and absence. The shaman understood these dualities intuitively, recognizing that perception itself is shaped by context, by subtle contrasts, and by the interaction of opposing forces. By meditating under the stars, the shaman honed the ability to see beyond the obvious, to discern the hidden currents that shape reality, and to translate these observations into guidance for the living. Celestial bodies often held symbolic associations with life, death, and transformation. The rising sun represented renewal, the cycles of birth and growth, while the setting sun marked endings, reflection, and the inevitability of mortality. Comets, meteors, and unusual celestial events were perceived as omens, signals that demanded careful attention and interpretation. The shaman's mind, trained through years of practice, could decode patterns in these movements, linking them to events on Earth, spiritual phenomena, and the collective consciousness of the tribe. Such observation was both scientific and mystical, blending empirical tracking with symbolic understanding to create a holistic perception of the cosmos. Firelight and starlight together created a dialogue between earth and sky. While flames illuminated the immediate environment, the stars offered perspective on the vastness beyond. The shaman often meditated on this contrast, understanding the balance between the intimate and the infinite. In these reflections, the shaman considered mortality, the continuity of life, and the unseen forces connecting all things. The night sky became a mirror, reflecting both external patterns and inner consciousness, teaching lessons about humility, patience, and the delicate interplay of forces beyond human control. The shaman also interpreted the movements of the moon and planets in relation to earthly events. Tides, weather changes, animal migrations, and even human behavior were thought to correspond with celestial cycles. Observing these patterns allowed the shaman to predict and advise, guiding the tribe in hunting, planting, gathering, and spiritual rituals. These observations were not merely utilitarian, they carried moral and philosophical dimensions. The cosmos was understood as an interconnected system, with human actions, natural events, and celestial movements forming a continuous web of cause and effect. The shaman's role was to navigate this web with insight and reverence, ensuring harmony between the tribe and the greater forces at play. Stars were also seen as ancestors or spirits, watching over the living. Their constant presence offered reassurance, guidance, and a sense of continuity. The shaman's meditations often involved tracing the paths of these celestial beings, interpreting their positions, brightness, and relative movements as forms of communication. Such practices reinforce the belief that life and death are interconnected, that the departed continue to influence the living, and that the cosmos itself participates in the unfolding story of existence. By reading the stars, the shaman maintained a dialogue with forces both temporal and eternal, ensuring that wisdom, memory, and insight flowed freely across boundaries that might otherwise seem insurmountable. The shaman's engagement with the night sky required patience, focus, and humility. Stars shift gradually, events unfold over months and years, and understanding emerges slowly. Each observation built upon previous ones, creating a layered comprehension of patterns, cycles, and spiritual correspondence. Mistakes could be instructive, teaching lessons about timing, interpretation, and the limits of perception. Success, however, offered profound clarity, a sense of connection to the eternal, and an ability to guide others with authority and insight. Through careful attention, the shaman aligned the tribe's activities with the rhythms of nature and the cosmos, ensuring survival while cultivating wisdom and reflection. Even seemingly random celestial phenomena were interpreted with care. A sudden flash of light, an unusual constellation, or a rare eclipse could provoke fear, wonder, or contemplation. The shaman observed these occurrences attentively, seeking meaning in patterns, anomalies, and repetitions. These events were often woven into stories, myths, or ritual practice, reinforcing cultural memory and shared understanding. In this way, the night sky functioned not only as a practical guide but also as a repository of narrative, philosophy, and collective wisdom. The night sky also offered a reflective space for personal meditation. The shaman could lie beneath its vast expanse, contemplating the cycles of life, death, and the unseen forces that bind existence. In this silence, the mind could wander, explore, and perceive truths inaccessible in the chaos of daily life. Stars provided both perspective and intimacy, reminding the shaman of the smallness of the individual in the grand scheme of the cosmos while simultaneously offering a connection to something eternal. These contemplations informed ritual practice, guidance for the tribe, and the shaman's understanding of life and death. In essence, the night sky became both a teacher and a companion. Its rhythms, cycles, and anomalies offered lessons in patience, awareness, and philosophical reflection. Its beauty inspired awe, reverence, and humility. And its constancy provided a sense of continuity, a reminder that despite the transience of human life, the forces that govern existence endure. For the shaman, the stars were never distant, they were intimate participants in the ongoing dialogue between life, death, and the unseen. Through careful observation, meditation, and interpretation, the shaman transformed the cosmos into a living, communicative system, one that guided both practical decisions and spiritual understanding. By dawn, the sky began to shift once more, the stars fading as sunlight crept over the horizon. The shaman, having absorbed the lessons of the night, returned to the tribe with knowledge, insight, and perspective. Observations made in darkness informed actions in light, and reflections beneath the stars shaped guidance offered to the living. The connection to the night sky, though subtle, was profound, an enduring reminder that humans exist within a vast, intricate, and interconnected universe, one that can be understood, interpreted, and honored through careful attention, empathy, and reflection. Death is not merely an end, it is a threshold, a transformation, and a presence that demands recognition. The shaman understood this intimately, moving among the living and the dead with a sensitivity honed through years of observation, meditation, and ritual. In prehistoric communities, death was a constant companion, a reality that shaped every aspect of life, from hunting strategies to social bonds, from daily routines to ceremonial practice. Bodies decayed, animals perished, and the elements claimed all things eventually. Yet, for the shaman, death was not absence, it was continuity, a state of being that retained energy, memory, and influence. Engaging with death required courage, attentiveness, and an understanding of forces that most humans would instinctively fear. Funerary practices were elaborate and deliberate. Bodies were often prepared with care, wrapped in furs, adorned with shells, feathers, and pigments, and sometimes positioned in ways that aligned with celestial or environmental markers. These rituals were more than symbolic, they were active engagements with the forces of life and death. The shaman interpreted the positioning of limbs, the choice of grave goods, and the orientation of the body as messages from the living and the departed. Through these observations, patterns emerged, guiding ritual practices, social organization, and spiritual understanding. Each death was both an ending and a lesson, an event that demanded reflection, empathy, and interpretation. The shaman's role was to facilitate passage. In approaching the dead, the shaman did not merely witness, they actively mediated, ensuring the spirit transitioned safely while maintaining a balance with the living. Ceremonies involved chanting, rhythmic movement, and sometimes the use of fire or smoke to guide the departed. Every gesture was deliberate, every sound measured. The shaman's understanding of the interplay between physical and spiritual elements was critical. A misstep could disturb the balance, provoke unrest, or even invite danger. Their attentiveness transformed ritual into both protection and guidance, honoring the deceased while safeguarding the living. Death was not uniform, each passing carried unique qualities. Some departed peacefully, leaving traces of energy that were calm, luminous, or instructive. Others were violent, untimely, or accompanied by fear and confusion, leaving residual impressions that demanded careful attention. The shaman observed these subtle differences through sensory attunement, the positioning of the body, the condition of the surroundings, and even the presence of small disturbances in nature that could indicate lingering spirits. Interpretation of these signs informed ritual responses, advice to the community, and personal meditation. The shaman's sensitivity created a dialogue, a connection between worlds that ensured continuity, understanding, and harmony. Eyes, as always, played a central role. Even in death, the gaze could carry residual energy, hinting at the life that had been, the experiences that shaped the individual, and the lingering attachments that might affect the living. The shaman studied these cues with precision, understanding that the soul's presence often imprinted itself subtly upon physical form. Observing the eyes of the deceased was an act of both respect and inquiry, a way of accessing knowledge, memory, and guidance beyond ordinary perception. Through this careful attention, the shaman navigated the unseen, transforming fear and uncertainty into insight and connection. The environment surrounding death was deeply significant. Burial locations were chosen carefully: caves, riverbanks, hilltops, or forest clearings, each with symbolic, practical, and spiritual implications. Water might carry purification, height might symbolize proximity to the heavens, and forested areas could provide shelter and continuity with life. The shaman interpreted these choices, understanding the interplay between geography, ritual, and cosmic alignment. This awareness reinforced the perception that death was embedded in a broader natural and spiritual order, one in which the living and dead, earth and sky, animal and human, were interconnected in continuous cycles. Emotional engagement was essential. The shaman experienced grief, empathy, and reflection alongside the tribe, yet maintained a form of presence that allowed clear perception and guidance. Mourning was not suppression, it was integration, channeling emotion into ritual, interpretation, and instruction. The shaman's composure balanced respect for the dead with the practical needs of the living, guiding the community through moments of sorrow, uncertainty, and fear. This delicate balance exemplified the shaman's dual responsibility, serving as both emotional anchor and spiritual navigator. Stories of death, communicated through ritual and oral tradition, reinforced lessons about mortality, continuity, and the unseen. The shaman wove narratives that honored the deceased, conveyed insight, and instructed the living. These narratives were embedded with symbolism: animals, celestial events, fire, and water all carried meaning. Through storytelling, the tribe maintained connection to ancestors, history, and the natural world. The shaman's interpretation of these stories ensured that wisdom was transmitted, and that each death contributed not only to memory but to ongoing understanding, shaping the ethical, spiritual, and practical dimensions of communal life. The shaman also perceived death as a teacher. Each passing provided insight into human existence, the fragility of life, and the interdependence of all beings. Observing decomposition, seasonal cycles, and animal interactions with corpses revealed ecological lessons, while engagement with spirits offered spiritual guidance. Death, in this sense, was not an adversary but a mirror of life's patterns, an ongoing dialogue that shaped understanding and informed decisions. The shaman embraced this perspective, transforming the inevitability of mortality into wisdom, empathy, and ritual practice. Finally, death was a lens through which the shaman explored philosophical questions. What is existence? What persists beyond physical form? How does life interact with unseen forces? Ritual and observation provided partial answers, allowing humans to comprehend patterns that might otherwise seem chaotic or frightening. Through careful attention, meditation, and engagement, the shaman created a framework in which death was neither final nor senseless but a transition that informed, guided, and enriched the living. By honoring the dead, observing patterns, and interpreting signs, the shaman maintained continuity between worlds, ensuring that mortality contributed to both practical survival and spiritual understanding. The fire has always been more than a source of warmth or a tool for survival. For the shaman, it was a living entity, a medium of transformation, and a conduit between worlds. The flames danced unpredictably, casting shadows that flickered across cave walls, rocks, and bodies. To the untrained eye, fire was mere light and heat; to the shaman, it was language, energy, and insight. Each crackle, each burst of spark, carried meaning, reflecting both the physical state of the fuel and the intangible presence of unseen forces. Observing fire required attentiveness, patience, and intuition, a sensitivity that allowed the shaman to perceive patterns, messages, and the subtle interplay between material and spiritual realities. Fire served as a mirror for the human soul. Its unpredictability mirrored the flux of consciousness, the volatility of emotion, and the interplay of life and death. Gazing into flames, the shaman could enter trance-like states, meditating on the connections between the living and the dead, the physical and the spiritual, the temporal and the eternal. Reflections within the fire became a portal to insight; the shapes and movements suggested messages from spirits, warnings, or revelations. The shaman interpreted these signs with care, understanding that each flicker could signify opportunity, danger, or hidden knowledge. Fire, in this sense, was both a teacher and a guide, illuminating aspects of existence invisible in ordinary perception. Rituals involving fire were elaborate and intentional. The shaman arranged logs, embers, and kindling in specific patterns, often aligning them with celestial cues or symbolic representations of life, death, and spirit. Certain materials, resins, herbs, or oils, enhanced the flames, producing scents and colors that carried additional meaning. The rising smoke was considered a bridge between worlds, carrying messages, prayers, and offerings to spirits or ancestors. Observing the behavior of flames and smoke allowed the shaman to interpret spiritual responses, guiding decisions and offering insight to the living. In this way, fire functioned as both medium and message, simultaneously physical and metaphysical. The interplay of light and shadow created by fire influenced perception and understanding. Shadows cast upon walls, rocks, or bodies could suggest movement, presence, or intent. The shaman read these shadows with precision, discerning between natural phenomena and manifestations of unseen forces. Patterns emerged through repetition and observation, creating a visual language that informed ritual, navigation, and interpretation of the environment. Firelight, in combination with careful attention, provided a lens through which the shaman could perceive both the tangible and intangible aspects of reality. Fire was also central to healing practices. Its warmth comforted the sick and injured, and its energy was believed to stimulate recovery. The shaman used heat and flame in conjunction with herbal treatments, chants, and ritual gestures to restore balance within the body and spirit. The fire's intensity and rhythm were attuned to the condition of the patient, providing a dynamic, responsive medium for intervention. In this capacity, fire was simultaneously practical and symbolic, reinforcing the interconnectedness of natural elements, human health, and spiritual well-being. The act of maintaining fire was itself a meditation. Tending embers required constant attention, adding fuel, adjusting airflow, and ensuring stability while observing the behavior of the flames. This careful practice cultivated mindfulness, focus, and awareness of subtle shifts in energy. The shaman learned to interpret these shifts as messages from the environment or spiritual realms. Even small changes, spark intensity, flame color, or smoke movement, provided information about natural conditions, spiritual presence, or impending events. Fire thus became a teacher of observation, patience, and insight, reinforcing the shaman's ability to perceive and respond to the world. Fire's relationship to death and spirits was profound. Many rituals for the dead involved flames, whether in cremation, ceremonial lighting, or symbolic offerings. The shaman believed that fire could purify, guide, or illuminate the journey of the deceased. Observing the behavior of flames in these contexts offered insight into the presence, temperament, or messages of spirits. Flickering light on burial sites, objects, or ceremonial spaces was read carefully, revealing subtle cues about unresolved matters, guidance for the living, or the energy of those who had passed. In this sense, fire was both messenger and mediator, bridging life and death. Emotion intertwined with the observation of fire. Fear, awe, grief, and wonder were all reflected in the flickering flames. The shaman's practice required managing these emotions while remaining perceptive, empathetic, and discerning. Emotional resonance with fire allowed for deeper understanding, recognizing the subtle expressions of energy, interpreting symbolic cues, and responding to both human and spiritual needs. In this dynamic interaction, fire became a medium through which the shaman engaged with the full spectrum of experience, balancing internal and external realities. Fire was also a symbol of transformation. Organic matter became energy, darkness became light, and raw material was reshaped through its influence. The shaman saw parallels in human life, mortality transformed into memory, experience into wisdom, and fear into understanding. Fire illuminated the transient nature of existence while offering a sense of continuity and renewal. Its energy mirrored cycles observed in nature, death, and consciousness, reinforcing the shaman's perception of interconnectedness and the flow of existence. Nighttime rituals often paired fire with sound, motion, and sensory elements. Drumming, chanting, and repetitive movement complemented the flickering flames, creating a holistic experience that engaged body, mind, and spirit. This sensory integration amplified perception, allowing the shaman to enter states of heightened awareness where communication with spirits, insight into natural phenomena, and understanding of human experience became possible. Fire thus served as a focal point, an anchor for meditation, and a bridge between the ordinary and the extraordinary. The philosophical dimensions of fire were inseparable from practical observation. Its dual nature, destructive yet sustaining, unpredictable yet consistent, offered lessons about balance, adaptability, and the impermanence of all things. The shaman reflected on these qualities, understanding that life, like fire, is fragile, energetic, and in constant flux. The careful study and interaction with flames provided guidance for ethical decisions, spiritual reflection, and communal leadership, illustrating the inseparability of observation, ritual, and philosophical insight. Finally, fire reinforced the shaman's connection to community. It was a source of gathering, warmth, and shared experience. Around flames, stories were told, lessons were imparted, and rituals were enacted. The shaman guided these moments, weaving practical knowledge with spiritual insight, creating a space where human life, memory, and understanding converged. Fire illuminated more than physical surroundings, it revealed patterns, meaning, and connection, sustaining both the body and the spirit, the living and the departed. Through attentive observation, ritual practice, and reflective meditation, fire became an indispensable companion to the shaman. Its energy, symbolism, and responsiveness provided insight into the unseen, guidance for the living, and continuity with the dead. It was both teacher and mediator, practical tool and spiritual lens. By mastering the dialogue with fire, the shaman maintained harmony, perception, and wisdom, transforming a simple element into a bridge between worlds, a mirror of consciousness, and a source of enduring understanding. Water is life, and yet it is also a threshold. For the shaman, rivers, lakes, and streams were more than sources of hydration or sustenance. They were dynamic entities, living and breathing forces that reflected the flow of existence itself. The surface of water is deceptive, calm yet restless, reflective yet deep, concealing currents and creatures beneath its mirror-like appearance. The shaman observed these waters with patience and reverence, attuning to their sounds, movements, and subtle changes. Ripples, eddies, and reflections became signs, messages, and metaphors, conveying insight about both the material and spiritual worlds. Water, like fire, was a medium through which the shaman interpreted patterns, predicted events, and engaged with forces beyond ordinary perception. Streams and rivers held particular significance in shamanic practice. Their flow was a symbol of time, continuity, and the inevitable movement of life toward change and transformation. Observing the current, the shaman could infer not only ecological information, such as upstream dangers or the presence of fish, but also spiritual messages. The interplay of light on moving water, the resonance of splashes, and the reflections of celestial bodies created a language that required attunement, intuition, and careful interpretation. The shaman's understanding of water was thus both practical and symbolic, bridging survival with insight, observation with reflection. Lakes and pools offered another dimension of perception. Their stillness contrasted with the ceaseless motion of rivers, providing spaces for meditation, reflection, and ritual. A lake's calm surface mirrored the sky, suggesting continuity between earth and heaven, material and spiritual, life and death. The shaman often used these sites for contemplation, immersing themselves physically or symbolically in water to access altered states of consciousness. Water's reflective property enabled self-reflection, allowing the shaman to perceive subtle emotional, psychological, and spiritual currents within themselves and the community. Through these interactions, water became both mirror and teacher, revealing truths that were not accessible through ordinary perception alone. Rain and precipitation also carried meaning. The shaman observed clouds, storms, and the rhythm of rainfall with meticulous attention, interpreting their arrival, intensity, and patterns as messages from spirits or omens for human activity. Rain could signal fertility, abundance, or change. It could also represent challenge, unpredictability, or disruption. The shaman read these signs not only for ecological purposes, such as planning hunts or harvests, but also for ritual guidance, spiritual reflection, and philosophical insight. Each drop of water was simultaneously practical and symbolic, reinforcing the interconnectedness of the natural, human, and spiritual realms. Water's role in death rituals was profound. Streams and rivers often served as conduits, guiding spirits along their journey. The shaman's careful placement of offerings, gestures, and rituals at water's edge was intended to ease transitions, honor the departed, and maintain balance between worlds. Observing the interaction of currents with objects, the reflection of light on water, and the subtle patterns of movement allowed the shaman to perceive the presence of spirits, residual energy, or unresolved matters. Water functioned as both guide and witness, a medium that connected life, death, and spiritual continuity. The sound of water was as instructive as its appearance. Bubbling brooks, rushing rapids, or gentle lapping against the shore conveyed rhythm, energy, and information. The shaman could discern subtle differences, the approach of predators, the movement of animals, or even the shifting of spiritual energy. Attuning to these auditory cues required patience, concentration, and a heightened sensitivity cultivated over years of practice. The sound of water became a language, providing insight into both the physical environment and the metaphysical landscape that existed alongside it. Water also served as a metaphor for human emotion, memory, and consciousness. Its depth, flow, and clarity mirrored the mind's capacities for reflection, understanding, and adaptability. The shaman observed how water moved around obstacles, shaped itself to context, and responded to external forces, drawing lessons about resilience, flexibility, and the navigation of challenges. Just as a river flows around stones, humans must navigate the complexities of life, adapting to circumstances while maintaining integrity and continuity. This symbolic understanding informed guidance, teaching, and ritual practice within the community. The act of ritual immersion, bathing in rivers, lakes, or rain, was a form of purification. Physical cleansing merged with spiritual and emotional renewal, allowing the shaman to enter states of heightened awareness or to prepare for ceremony. Water carried the capacity to absorb intention, energy, and prayer, functioning as both a tool and a participant in ritual. The shaman's movements, gestures, and focus during immersion aligned with natural currents, creating resonance between body, environment, and spirit. Through this process, water became a medium of transformation, clarity, and insight, reinforcing the shaman's role as mediator between worlds. Ice and frozen waters, when present, introduced another layer of complexity. Their solidity, transparency, and latent potential reflected different aspects of life, death, and the unseen. Observing the subtle fractures, reflections, and textures of ice provided information about environmental conditions, animal behavior, and seasonal cycles. For the shaman, ice was also symbolic, a frozen moment in time, a threshold between states, a reminder of impermanence and hidden depth. Even in frozen landscapes, water remained a dynamic, instructive presence, offering both practical guidance and philosophical reflection. Water was inseparable from fire, earth, and air in the shaman's understanding of the world. Its cycles, from rainfall to river flow, from lakes to evaporation, illustrated the interdependence of natural forces. Observing these cycles reinforced the shaman's awareness of balance, causality, and interconnectedness. Each interaction with water was simultaneously sensory, ecological, symbolic, and spiritual. By perceiving its patterns and integrating them into ritual, guidance, and observation, the shaman maintained a holistic understanding of existence, bridging the physical and metaphysical, the seen and unseen. Through attentive observation, ritual engagement, and philosophical reflection, the shaman transformed water from a mere resource into a living, communicative entity. Streams, rivers, lakes, and rain became teachers, guides, and mirrors, providing insight into survival, community, mortality, and the interconnected rhythms of life. Water's presence reinforced the shaman's ability to perceive subtle patterns, interpret messages, and guide the living while honoring the dead. In this way, water was both medium and mentor, an essential companion in the shamanic journey of understanding, reflection, and communion with the natural and spiritual worlds. Mountains have always held a unique, almost sacred presence in the shaman's world. Their towering forms punctuate the horizon, casting long shadows across valleys and forests, and presenting a combination of awe, danger, and spiritual resonance. For the shaman, mountains were more than physical landmarks, they were sentinels of time, repositories of energy, and thresholds between worlds. The ridges, cliffs, and hidden caves offered not only shelter and vantage points but also spaces where the veil between the tangible and intangible thinned, allowing the shaman to perceive forces ordinarily hidden from the eye. Each mountain, each stone, was read for its shape, alignment, and subtle energy, providing insight into natural events, spiritual messages, and the cycles of life and death. Ascending a mountain required physical endurance and mental focus, but it was also a symbolic journey. The climb mirrored the shaman's inward path, a traversal through layers of consciousness, fear, and awareness. Each step brought changes in perspective, the forest below receded, weather patterns shifted, and the air grew thinner, challenging the body and sharpening the mind. The shaman used these changes to enter states of heightened perception, attuning senses to wind currents, sound, and vibration. Rocks, ice, and soil were not inert, they carried memory, resonance, and guidance. The journey itself became ritual, a form of meditation that bridged physical exertion with spiritual insight. Caves within mountains were particularly significant. They were sanctuaries, classrooms, and gateways. The shaman observed subtle differences in temperature, humidity, and light, recognizing that each cave held distinct energies. Echoes amplified sounds, creating auditory landscapes that could reveal hidden presences. Shadows played across walls, suggesting shapes and patterns that were interpreted as spiritual communication or guidance. Inside these natural chambers, the shaman could meditate, perform rituals, or commune with spirits, using the architecture of the mountain itself as a medium. These spaces became laboratories of perception, allowing for the refinement of insight, intuition, and understanding. Mountains also hosted diverse ecological signals. Changes in flora and fauna, the presence of predators, or the shifting of snow and ice carried critical information about environmental conditions and resource availability. The shaman interpreted these cues, guiding the tribe's movement, hunting practices, and seasonal planning. Observing a sudden flock of birds, the migration of prey, or the movement of wolves across a ridge provided knowledge that was both practical and symbolic. The mountain thus served as a living map, a dynamic interface between the tribe and the broader environment, encoded with layers of ecological, social, and spiritual meaning. Wind patterns along mountain slopes held particular importance. The shaman could sense subtle shifts in pressure, direction, and sound, interpreting them as harbingers of weather, changes in animal behavior, or spiritual presence. The mountain air, crisp and moving, carried scents, vibrations, and messages that required patience and attentiveness to perceive. In these moments, the shaman's body became an instrument, responding to subtle cues with intuition, observation, and embodied knowledge. The wind was both messenger and participant, revealing information that was often imperceptible to others. Rituals on mountain peaks were among the most intense and transformative. Elevated positions were believed to bring the shaman closer to the heavens, the ancestors, and spiritual forces. Fire, chant, and movement were employed to align with celestial patterns, amplify energy, and create resonance between body, environment, and spirit. The thin air heightened sensory perception, making every sound, movement, and breath more vivid. The mountain became a stage for communication with the unseen, where the shaman could access insight, guidance, and clarity unattainable at lower elevations. These rituals reinforce the shaman's role as mediator between worlds, connecting human experience with the cosmos. The emotional impact of mountains was profound. Their immensity inspired awe, reverence, and humility. Facing sheer cliffs or observing jagged peaks bathed in sunrise or stormlight reminded the shaman of the smallness of individual life in the vastness of existence. Yet, these same mountains offered perspective, resilience, and understanding. They symbolized endurance, continuity, and the interplay of time, environment, and consciousness. The shaman's reflection on these qualities informed guidance to the tribe, shaping both spiritual and practical understanding of life, mortality, and the forces that govern the world. Mountains were also linked to the dead and the spirits of ancestors. High places were often chosen for burial, cremation, or offerings, believed to facilitate the transition of souls or to maintain connection with celestial forces. The shaman interpreted these sites, reading stone alignments, placement of remains, and surrounding features for spiritual cues. Observing the interaction between wind, sunlight, and stone provided insight into presence, energy, and guidance. Mountains thus became repositories of memory and connection, linking the living with those who had passed and maintaining continuity across generations. Ecologically, mountains provided critical lessons about adaptation, survival, and interdependence. The shaman observed how vegetation shifted with altitude, how animals navigated cliffs and ridges, and how weather patterns interacted with topography. These observations informed hunting strategies, resource management, and risk assessment. The lessons of mountains extended beyond survival, they offered metaphors for human behavior, resilience, and adaptability. Observing how life thrived in seemingly harsh conditions revealed principles applicable to community, ritual, and personal understanding. The philosophy of mountains extended into metaphors for consciousness and perception. Ascending, descending, observing, and interpreting the forms, movements, and energies of mountains became exercises in reflection. The shaman perceived life, death, and the unseen forces as layered and complex, much like a mountain range with peaks, valleys, hidden caves, and exposed ridges. Understanding required patience, attention, and humility. Each mountain journey reinforced the shaman's awareness of cycles, interdependence, and the delicate balance between action and observation, presence and reflection. Interaction with mountains demanded embodiment. Every step, breath, and gesture was informed by attention, balance, and sensory integration. Rocks, soil, wind, and altitude were perceived as partners in perception. This embodied awareness allowed the shaman to interpret subtle environmental and spiritual cues with clarity, ensuring that insight was grounded in both physical experience and spiritual attunement. Mountains thus served as both setting and participant in the shaman's journey, providing lessons that were simultaneously practical, emotional, and philosophical. The symbolism of mountains extended to narrative and storytelling. Tribes often incorporated peaks, ridges, and caves into myths, legends, and teachings. The shaman used these stories to transmit ecological knowledge, spiritual insight, and cultural memory, embedding lessons about resilience, connection, and the cycles of life. Mountains, therefore, were not just physical features, they were teachers, mirrors, and repositories of wisdom, shaping understanding across generations. Ultimately, mountains embodied the interplay of permanence and impermanence. While massive and enduring, they are shaped by wind, water, and time. Observing these transformations, the shaman reflected on the fragility and resilience of life, the inevitability of change, and the continuity of existence beyond individual lifespans. Mountains taught patience, humility, and respect, reminding the shaman that understanding the world required observation, reflection, and an intimate connection with both physical and spiritual realms. Through careful observation, ritual engagement, and reflective meditation, the shaman transformed mountains from mere landscapes into living, communicative entities. Peaks, cliffs, caves, and ridges offered guidance, insight, and connection, informing survival, ritual practice, and philosophical reflection. By attuning to the rhythms, energies, and signals of these formidable formations, the shaman maintained harmony between the living and the unseen, bridging human experience with ecological and cosmic patterns. Mountains were more than terrain, they were mentors, mirrors, and sacred partners in the ongoing journey of understanding life, death, and existence itself. The forest is not merely a collection of trees, but a living, breathing entity, each element entwined in a delicate web of life. For the shaman, walking through its depths was akin to entering a temple, a sacred space where every leaf, branch, and creature conveyed meaning. The canopy above filtered sunlight into shifting patterns, and the undergrowth whispered with the movement of unseen creatures. The shaman's senses were heightened, attuned to every rustle, every scent, and every subtle vibration of the earth. In this attentiveness, the forest became a guide, a teacher, and a mirror, revealing both the laws of nature and the hidden currents of the unseen. Every sound was significant. The snap of a twig, the flit of wings, or the distant roar of a predator was not merely noise but a message. The shaman could discern the approach of animals, changes in weather, and the presence of both allies and dangers. This skill was cultivated over years of observation, practice, and meditation, transforming ordinary perception into a form of communication with the natural world. Silence, too, held meaning. The sudden cessation of noise could signal predator, prey, or an unseen force. The forest's auditory language required patience and sensitivity, offering guidance and insight to those who were able to listen. Light and shadow shaped understanding. Sunlight breaking through the canopy created patterns that seemed alive, shifting with every breeze. Shadows cast by leaves and branches could suggest motion, intention, or presence beyond what was immediately visible. The shaman read these visual cues with precision, interpreting both natural phenomena and potential spiritual manifestations. Firelight in the forest at night intensified this dynamic, illuminating forms that inspired both awe and caution. The interplay of illumination and darkness became a tool for meditation, reflection, and ritual, teaching lessons about perception, focus, and the dualities inherent in life. Plants and herbs were not merely food or medicine, they were carriers of information, energy, and connection. The shaman observed growth patterns, coloration, and relationships between species, understanding the ecological balance that sustained life. Certain plants were imbued with spiritual significance, used in rituals to invoke protection, healing, or insight. Others served as indicators of environmental changes, signaling seasons, soil quality, or animal movements. Knowledge of these subtleties allowed the shaman to maintain harmony with the forest, ensuring both survival and spiritual attunement. Animals were teachers, messengers, and mirrors of existence. Tracking their movements required attentiveness, patience, and empathy. The shaman learned to anticipate behaviors, recognize signs, and interpret interactions, discerning not only ecological patterns but spiritual messages. Predators demonstrated strength, caution, and adaptability, herbivores embodied vigilance and resourcefulness. Observing these qualities informed guidance for the tribe, helping them navigate survival while fostering respect and understanding of the broader ecological web. The forest, alive with movement, became a classroom, laboratory, and sacred space for learning. Water sources within the forest carried multiple layers of significance. Streams, ponds, and rain-soaked soil provided sustenance, but they were also symbolic and spiritual. The sound of flowing water, the shimmer of sunlight on ripples, and the patterns of reflection offered insight into cycles, energy, and unseen forces. The shaman could interpret these cues for practical guidance, locating safe drinking water, understanding the behavior of animals, or predicting weather, as well as for ritual and spiritual purposes, using water as a medium of purification, meditation, and communion with spirits. The shaman's journey through the forest was both physical and metaphysical. Steps were measured, breath controlled, and attention fully engaged with the surrounding world. Every interaction with the environment, touching bark, listening to bird calls, observing tracks, was a dialogue. The forest communicated continuously, revealing patterns, warnings, and lessons to those willing to perceive. This immersive engagement cultivated humility, patience, and awareness, teaching the shaman about interconnectedness, the flow of life, and the unseen forces that shaped existence. Seasonal changes added layers of complexity. Spring brought renewal, growth, and abundance, while autumn signaled transition and preparation for scarcity. Winter demanded vigilance, resilience, and adaptation, and summer offered both opportunity and challenge. The shaman observed these cycles in flora, fauna, and environmental patterns, interpreting them for practical survival and spiritual understanding. These cyclical observations reinforced awareness of impermanence, interdependence, and the necessity of attunement to the rhythms of the natural world. Rituals in the forest amplified perception. Chanting, drumming, and movement synchronized with natural rhythms, creating resonance that heightened awareness. The shaman engaged fully, body and mind aligned with environmental cues, drawing energy and insight from the surroundings. These rituals reinforced connection with the unseen, allowing the shaman to perceive patterns and messages otherwise inaccessible. In this way, the forest became both a teacher and a temple, offering lessons in survival, wisdom, and the spiritual dynamics of life and death. The philosophical dimension of the forest was inseparable from its practical and spiritual aspects. Every interaction, observation, and ritual carried insight into balance, interdependence, and the cycles of existence. Predators and prey, wind and water, decay and growth, all demonstrated principles applicable to human life and community. The forest was both mirror and mentor, teaching the shaman about the nature of life, mortality, and ethical stewardship of the environment. Attentive observation and thoughtful reflection transformed these lessons into guidance for the tribe, ensuring harmony, insight, and continuity. Fear and awe were intertwined. The forest inspired wonder with its beauty, complexity, and vibrancy, yet it also posed threats through predators, hidden hazards, and unpredictable forces. The shaman navigated this duality with awareness, balancing caution with exploration, respect with engagement. Through this interplay, the forest taught lessons about courage, discernment, and the delicate equilibrium required for survival and understanding. These experiences shaped the shaman's approach to both life and ritual, embedding wisdom into daily practice and spiritual teaching. Through meticulous observation, ritual engagement, and philosophical reflection, the shaman transformed the forest from a collection of trees into a dynamic, living entity. Each step, sound, and sight carried potential meaning, offering lessons about survival, mortality, spirituality, and interconnectedness. By attuning fully to the environment, the shaman maintained a dialogue with life itself, understanding patterns, anticipating challenges, and mediating the relationship between the tribe and the unseen. The forest became a guide, teacher, and mirror, revealing the intricate connections that shape existence, both visible and invisible, material and spiritual. Animals were the living pulse of the prehistoric world, their presence and behavior offering constant insight into the rhythms of life and survival. For the shaman, they were far more than food sources or companions, they were teachers, messengers, and reflections of the unseen forces that governed existence. Observing their movements, interactions, and patterns revealed ecological truths, spiritual messages, and lessons in strategy, resilience, and interconnection. Each species carried its own significance. Predators demonstrated strength and caution, herbivores illustrated vigilance and adaptation, and scavengers embodied resourcefulness and patience. The shaman's attunement to these creatures allowed for a profound understanding of the natural world and its complex networks of cause and effect. Tracking animals was both a practical and spiritual endeavor. Footprints, broken branches, scat, and scent were meticulously observed, analyzed, and interpreted. These signs provided information about migration, population density, and potential danger, shaping decisions about hunting, territory, and safety. Yet, the shaman also read these signs symbolically, perceiving patterns that reflected cycles of life, death, and transformation. A sudden scattering of birds, a predator's unexpected movement, or the migration of herd animals could signal environmental changes, impending challenges, or spiritual messages. In this way, animal behavior became a form of communication, a living language that demanded sensitivity, patience, and reflection. Birds, with their ability to traverse air and observe from above, held particular significance. The shaman watched their flight patterns, calls, and roosting behavior, interpreting these as indicators of weather, predator presence, or spiritual insight. Birds were often considered messengers between worlds, able to carry observation, energy, or guidance across realms inaccessible to humans. Their songs were not merely melodies but communicative signals, offering context, warning, or inspiration. By attuning to these subtle cues, the shaman transformed observation into knowledge, perception into guidance, and life into a dynamic interplay of awareness. Predators represented both threat and wisdom. The shaman observed their hunting techniques, territorial behavior, and interactions with prey, extracting lessons applicable to human survival. Stealth, patience, timing, and instinct were qualities mirrored in shamanic practice, guiding decision-making and ritual execution. Predators also embodied symbolic significance. Their presence invoked respect, caution, and awareness of forces beyond human control. By understanding their patterns and energies, the shaman could navigate both ecological and spiritual landscapes, integrating fear with respect, observation with intuition. Herbivores offered different insights. Their movements, feeding behavior, and herd dynamics revealed information about environmental changes, resource availability, and seasonal cycles. The shaman observed their vigilance, responses to threats, and social interactions, gaining practical guidance for hunting, foraging, and migration. Symbolically, herbivores reflected qualities such as alertness, cooperation, and adaptability. Observing these creatures allowed the shaman to understand both survival strategies and philosophical lessons, integrating ecological observation with spiritual reflection. Interactions between species were equally instructive. Predator-prey dynamics, competition for resources, and cooperative behavior offered models for human action and social organization. The shaman interpreted these interactions not merely as survival mechanisms but as reflections of broader principles governing life, energy, and interconnectedness. Patterns of behavior provided insight into timing, balance, and consequences, reinforcing the shaman's role as mediator, teacher, and guide. By observing these networks, the shaman cultivated a holistic understanding of the natural and spiritual realms. Animal tracks carried layers of meaning. Their size, depth, and arrangement revealed species, number, movement patterns, and potential health or emotional states. The shaman could reconstruct events, anticipate future movements, and predict environmental changes based on these subtle signs. Tracks were not static, they evolved with time, weather, and interaction, creating a living record of activity. Interpreting this record required both experience and intuition, allowing the shaman to access ecological, spiritual, and symbolic information simultaneously. Sounds were equally vital. The calls, roars, and rustlings of animals conveyed emotional states, environmental shifts, and social interactions. The shaman attuned to these auditory cues, perceiving nuances invisible to most. A subtle change in a herd's movement, the approach of a predator, or the agitation of small mammals could indicate opportunity, risk, or hidden presence. These sounds were integrated into observation and ritual, forming a comprehensive system of awareness that informed both practical and spiritual decision-making. Animals also inhabited the shaman's spiritual imagination. Totems, spirit animals, and symbolic creatures emerged from observation, reflection, and intuition. These entities were not merely metaphorical, they were perceived as active participants in the shamanic landscape, guiding decisions, influencing rituals, and conveying messages from realms beyond ordinary perception. The qualities embodied by these animals, strength, cunning, vigilance, resilience, were mirrored in the shaman's practice, creating a dialogue between the human, natural, and spiritual worlds. Hunting and ritual were intertwined. The shaman's understanding of animal behavior informed both practical strategies and ceremonial actions. Offerings, chants, and gestures were employed to honor animals, ensure future abundance, and maintain balance between the human and natural worlds. Observing the outcomes of hunts, the shaman interpreted patterns of success, scarcity, or misfortune, linking these to broader ecological and spiritual principles. In this way, animals became teachers, partners, and active participants in the cycles of life, death, and survival. The emotional impact of animals was profound. Their beauty, power, and unpredictability inspired awe, respect, and reflection. Predators evoked fear tempered by admiration, prey elicited empathy and attentiveness, and the subtle interactions among species taught lessons about cooperation, resilience, and adaptation. The shaman cultivated emotional resonance with these creatures, integrating observation, intuition, and empathy into a holistic understanding of the world. Through this attunement, the shaman transformed the natural environment into a living narrative, one that informed survival, ritual, and spiritual insight. Ultimately, the shaman perceived animals as mirrors of human experience and the broader forces that shape existence. Observing, tracking, and interpreting their behavior allowed for insight into survival, social organization, and spiritual guidance. Animals bridged the physical and spiritual realms, providing both practical instruction and philosophical reflection. Through attentive engagement, the shaman maintained a dialogue with the natural world, integrating lessons of ecology, spirituality, and morality into ritual practice, communal guidance, and personal meditation. In the intricate web of prehistoric life, animals were more than companions or prey, they were living texts, sacred messengers, and mirrors of the unseen. By observing their movement, sound, and interaction, the shaman translated these patterns into understanding, guidance, and wisdom. This connection reinforced the continuity between the living, the dead, and the environment, emphasizing that survival and insight were inseparable from perception, empathy, and reflection. Animals were both teachers and participants in the shaman's ongoing dialogue with the world, guiding action, informing ritual, and revealing the hidden structures of life, death, and the unseen forces that govern all existence. Rituals were the heartbeat of prehistoric spiritual life, acting as bridges between the seen and unseen, the living and the dead. For the shaman, ritual was not merely performance but an immersive, multisensory engagement that intertwined body, mind, and spirit. Every gesture, chant, movement, and breath was intentional, designed to harmonize with natural rhythms, celestial cycles, and spiritual currents. Ritual transformed ordinary space into sacred space, ordinary time into liminal time, and ordinary perception into heightened awareness. It was through ritual that the shaman accessed wisdom, communicated with spirits, and guided the community through the mysteries of existence, mortality, and the unseen. The preparation for ritual was meticulous. The shaman selected specific materials, tools, and locations, each chosen for symbolic and practical significance. Herbs, resins, stones, pigments, and animal parts were carefully arranged, their placement conveying meaning and intention. Certain sites, caves, riverbanks, mountain ledges, or forest clearings, were favored for their energetic resonance, spatial alignment, or connection to celestial patterns. Even the timing of rituals was deliberate, often coinciding with solstices, lunar phases, or ecological cues, emphasizing the intertwined nature of human activity, cosmic cycles, and natural forces. Preparation was both practical and meditative, focusing the shaman's intention while creating a conducive environment for engagement with unseen energies. Movement and gesture were integral to ritual. The shaman's body became an instrument, channeling energy, symbolizing spiritual forces, and aligning with environmental and cosmic rhythms. Circular motions, stamping, swaying, or intricate hand gestures conveyed meaning, enacted transformation, and invoked presence. These movements were learned through observation, practice, and spiritual attunement, passed down through generations while remaining fluid and adaptable. Each gesture held layered significance, simultaneously practical, symbolic, and spiritual, creating a dynamic language that communicated with both the living and the unseen. Chanting and vocalization reinforced the ritual's potency. Repetitive sounds, tones, and rhythms produced resonance that altered perception, heightened sensory awareness, and facilitated connection with spirits. Chanting functioned as both signal and invocation, a bridge that harmonized human energy with natural and spiritual currents. Certain syllables, words, or patterns were considered particularly powerful, carrying intention, protection, or guidance. The shaman modulated volume, rhythm, and pitch, attuning vocal expression to environmental conditions, group dynamics, and ritual goals. Sound became a medium of transformation, perception, and communion, extending the shaman's presence beyond the physical body. Objects used in ritual were alive with meaning. Stones might represent ancestors, animal bones symbolized qualities or forces, and pigments expressed connection to earth, blood, or life energy. Each item was selected and handled with care, attuned to its properties, origin, and symbolic resonance. Placement, motion, and interaction with these objects created a dialogue between material reality and spiritual perception. The shaman interpreted their behavior, observing subtle changes or interactions as messages from spirits or reflections of environmental and cosmic energies. These tools were extensions of perception, amplifying awareness and guiding action. Fire played a central role in ritual, symbolizing transformation, purification, and illumination. Flames danced unpredictably, providing a medium for communication, reflection, and energy manipulation. Smoke carried intention upward, connecting the material and spiritual realms, while the heat grounded participants in physical reality. The shaman observed the behavior of fire, noting color, movement, and intensity, interpreting subtle variations as guidance or messages. Fire's dual nature, destructive and sustaining, mirrored the principles enacted in ritual, reinforcing understanding of balance, impermanence, and the interconnection of forces. Rituals were not isolated events, they engaged the community. The shaman guided participants, harmonizing collective intention, movement, and sound. Community engagement reinforced social cohesion, transmitted knowledge, and maintained continuity of tradition. Observing participant response, energy, and engagement allowed the shaman to adjust gestures, chants, and timing, ensuring alignment with both human and spiritual currents. Rituals thus became both collective experience and individualized perception, integrating practical, spiritual, and emotional dimensions. Altered states of consciousness were often central to ritual. Through chanting, drumming, fasting, or sensory manipulation, the shaman accessed heightened perception, intuitive insight, and spiritual connection. In these states, boundaries between self and environment blurred, and the unseen became perceptible. Spirits, ancestors, and forces of nature could be experienced directly, guiding action, revealing hidden knowledge, or facilitating healing. These altered states were cultivated with discipline and intention, ensuring safety, clarity, and alignment with communal and spiritual goals. Rituals also addressed life transitions. Birth, initiation, marriage, and death were marked through structured ceremonies that balanced practical guidance with spiritual significance. The shaman mediated these transitions, ensuring continuity, protection, and understanding. By framing human experience within ritual, the community internalized lessons about mortality, interconnectedness, and ethical conduct. Ritual provided structure, meaning, and orientation, transforming moments of uncertainty, vulnerability, and transformation into opportunities for insight, guidance, and spiritual alignment. Symbolism permeated every aspect of ritual. Animals, plants, celestial bodies, and natural elements conveyed layered meaning, linking practical, ecological, and spiritual understanding. Gestures, chants, and objects were read simultaneously as instruction, invocation, and reflection. The shaman navigated these symbols with skill, synthesizing ecological observation, spiritual insight, and cultural knowledge into coherent practice. Symbols were not abstract, they were living guides, embedded in both the environment and communal consciousness, reinforcing continuity, perception, and harmony. Rituals also engaged with mortality and the unseen. The shaman communicated with the dead, guided spirits, and interpreted signs of presence or energy. Offerings, gestures, and chants facilitated transitions, ensured protection, and maintained continuity. Observing the responses of fire, smoke, water, and other ritual elements allowed the shaman to discern subtle messages, transforming perception into knowledge and insight. In this way, ritual mediated life and death, physical and spiritual, visible and invisible, creating balance and understanding across dimensions. The emotional resonance of ritual was profound. Fear, awe, reverence, and joy were amplified, providing both participants and the shaman with heightened awareness and integration of experience. Emotional engagement ensured attentiveness, empathy, and reflection, reinforcing the depth of insight and the transformative potential of ritual. Through emotional immersion, the shaman translated sensation into understanding, maintaining alignment with spiritual, ecological, and communal dynamics. Ultimately, rituals were living, evolving processes. Observation, adaptation, and intuition guided their enactment, ensuring relevance and resonance across generations. They reinforced the shaman's connection to the natural and spiritual worlds, maintained communal cohesion, and cultivated individual and collective wisdom. Through careful practice, the shaman transformed ordinary experience into extraordinary insight, ordinary space into sacred space, and ordinary perception into heightened understanding. Ritual was a bridge, a teacher, and a mirror, reflecting the complexity, interconnectedness, and mystery of life itself. The night holds a distinct power, an otherworldly weight that both challenges and illuminates. For the shaman, darkness was not simply the absence of light, it was a realm alive with energy, mystery, and perception beyond ordinary senses. Shadows danced across landscapes, and the faint glimmers of stars, moonlight, or distant fire created shifting patterns that suggested presence, intent, or hidden forces. Every sound, rustling leaves, distant calls of animals, or the whisper of wind, was amplified and imbued with meaning. To navigate the night required attentiveness, patience, and trust in intuition, transforming fear into insight, darkness into illumination. Nighttime rituals were uniquely powerful. The shaman's body, senses, and mind were aligned with nocturnal rhythms, enhancing perception and connection. Chanting, drumming, and the use of fire or reflective surfaces amplified awareness, creating resonance with both earthly and spiritual currents. The absence of sunlight intensified the impact of subtle cues, making every shadow, flicker, or sound significant. Night allowed the shaman to perceive patterns, messages, and energies invisible in the day, bridging the human experience with forces beyond ordinary perception. In this liminal space, the shaman acted as mediator, guide, and observer of realms often hidden from others. The celestial sphere above provided orientation, guidance, and symbolic meaning. Stars, constellations, and planetary movements were read not only as navigational tools but also as markers of time, spiritual significance, and cosmic rhythm. The shaman observed the rise and fall of celestial bodies, noting alignments and changes with meticulous care. These observations informed ritual timing, agricultural planning, and spiritual understanding. Night sky patterns were often interpreted as messages from ancestors, omens, or reflections of unseen forces, reinforcing the shaman's role as a bridge between terrestrial and celestial realms. Animals at night revealed dimensions of existence invisible during daylight. Predators emerged, nocturnal birds called, and small mammals moved unseen through underbrush. The shaman observed these behaviors for practical purposes, tracking prey, avoiding danger, but also as metaphors for spiritual insight. The silent flight of an owl, the sudden cry of a predator, or the careful movement of a herd all carried layered meaning, illustrating balance, vigilance, and the cycles of life and death. Animals became guides, mirrors, and teachers, reinforcing lessons of perception, adaptability, and attunement to unseen currents. Fire at night was transformed into a living language. Its flicker, color, and intensity revealed more than warmth, they communicated energy, presence, and potential guidance. Smoke patterns, sparks, and ember movement were interpreted with care, offering insight into spiritual currents, environmental changes, or communal dynamics. Fire's glow illuminated rituals, shadows, and reflections, amplifying sensory experience and bridging perception with understanding. In the dark, fire became both tool and partner, a medium through which the shaman accessed knowledge, guidance, and spiritual insight. The interplay of light and shadow heightened philosophical reflection. Darkness concealed yet revealed, obscured yet illuminated, inviting contemplation on duality, impermanence, and the limits of perception. The shaman recognized that fear and awe were intertwined, that uncertainty and revelation coexisted, and that understanding often required patience and openness. Night provided lessons in humility, reflection, and balance, demonstrating that the unseen world was as vital as the visible, and that perception was expanded through attentive engagement with both. Sounds carried amplified meaning. The shaman's ears became instruments, distinguishing between environmental noise, animal communication, and subtle cues from spirits or unseen forces. The cadence, tone, and repetition of nocturnal sounds were interpreted for practical guidance, locating water, detecting predators, or finding safe paths, and spiritual understanding. Silence was equally potent. Sudden stillness often signaled presence, transition, or change. Attuning to these auditory signals required patience, discernment, and trust in intuition, creating a dynamic dialogue between shaman and environment. Nighttime also emphasized introspection. The shaman used darkness to meditate, reflect, and explore inner consciousness. Shadows within the mind mirrored shadows outside, revealing fears, desires, memories, and intuition. Dreams and visions were often interpreted in relation to nocturnal experience, linking internal and external realities. Through careful observation and reflection, the shaman cultivated insight into both personal and communal concerns, integrating perception, emotion, and spiritual guidance into practical action and ritual. The night amplified communal connection. Gatherings around fire, chanting, or storytelling took on heightened resonance. Darkness encouraged attentiveness, trust, and engagement, allowing participants to perceive subtle cues and energies otherwise unnoticed. The shaman guided these experiences, mediating between individual perception and collective understanding. Night became a crucible of communal wisdom, where stories, lessons, and ritual practices were transmitted, reinforcing social cohesion, spiritual alignment, and ecological understanding. Rituals conducted at night often addressed liminality, transition, uncertainty, and transformation. Birth, death, initiation, and other life changes were observed with heightened awareness, facilitated by darkness and the unique